Hello, good morning. Gavin, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. I hope everything is well. Thank you for agreeing to our little interview today. So let me say a few words about yourself. So I wrote a short paragraph about you. Today we want to talk about impact craters, and it's my pleasure to have you here, Dr. Gavin Kenny. And you are working on meteorites and meteorite impact craters for several years now. And we are planning this new course, Space Resources, and this is a great opportunity to chat with you a little more. And Gavin is currently at the Natural History Museum in Stockholm. He's a Swedish Research Council research fellow, and this is until 2024. And you received your BA in 2011 in geology from Trinity College in Dublin, and your PhD in 2016 also from Trinity College. Then you've been a Marie Curie Fellow at the Swedish Museum of Natural History, where you're now as well, and that was 2019 to 21. And then you were in the US for a while in Idaho, and then you got several awards. You were a Fulbright Scholar from 2018 to 2019, and you also got the Wiley Award 2016 at the Meteoritical Society meeting in Berlin. And you have various student prizes like the Adrian Phillips Prize from Trinity College Dublin in 2011. And well, quite an impressive record. So, and I think it's great to have you here. So I'm looking forward to kind of have a specialist on impact craters to talk to. So welcome, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
So where shall we start? I made a list of questions and I shared the questions with you, so you have a rough idea what we're going to talk about. But let's start with why do we as geologists actually work on impact craters? What is important about them? Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So there's a good few reasons we work on impact craters. A good place to start is thinking about Earth, and we've got about 200 impact structures on Earth that we're aware of, probably a couple hundred more to find. And possibly the most famous of these that most people will know is Chicxulub. So it's a big one, 180, 200 kilometers in diameter in Mexico, which caused a mass extinction. And this killed off the dinosaurs, and it's quite well known. It's one of the things most public will think about if they think about geology. So we know that impacts can cause mass extinctions. So that's a big important thing. Chicxulub is the one instance where we know that this happened, but we can't rule out that it might have happened other times. Did other impacts play some role in other extinction events? So that's one important aspect of impacts. Another, if we look at the moon and other planetary bodies in the inner solar system, we see a lot more impacts. And these date back to the early solar system, and these just haven't been preserved on Earth because we just have active tectonics and erosion, etc. So we've lost this early record. But if we look at the moon, we see that impacts are really important in the early solar system. So as this fundamental geological process back then. So it's very important to understand impacts if we want to know what was happening at the start of the solar system. So that's why it's another important aspect. And another thing that I know you want to touch on today is the economic aspect. So some impact structures on Earth, due to processes associated with the impact, we've formed economic deposits, and there are active mines at some of these. So.
That's something I'd love to come back to later, particularly in preparation of this space resource course that we're planning for this autumn. But now I think one question I get, at least from my girls at home, is when I show them a meteorite or things like that, what's actually the chance of being hit by a meteorite? Particularly today, you stressed that meteorites were maybe, or meteorite impacts were maybe more important early in the history of the solar system. But I mean, we have falls here in Uppsala. There was one just very recently, and the first fall in Sweden was in the 1880s, I think. Also here in the Uppsala area. So what's the chance of actually being hit by a meteorite?
I think it's fair to say it's pretty low.
Okay,
to put a very quantitative answer on that. So we're constantly being bombarded with small stuff like dust and sand-sized particles. And larger things, so chunks of rock that actually make it to the Earth's surface that don't just burn up through the atmosphere, we probably get a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand of those each year, but most of those aren't seen. They just drop into the oceans or deserted places. We probably recover a few tens of meteorites each year. So the actual chances of being hit in any given year, I think, are pretty low. And then the chances of bigger impacts, which might cause more destruction locally or even globally, these bigger objects they come into Earth's atmosphere much less often. And there are systems in place like NASA and other organizations monitor these near Earth objects. So
they would know if there's a big one falling towards a certain region or so, and then there could at least be some prior warning.
So every few years, there's kind of you see it pops up in the news. Oh, there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that this object might come near Earth, because we can't know its trajectory precisely, but the chances are so slim. It's nothing to lose sleep over.
That's comforting. I mean, probably the chance of being run over by a bus is bigger or so, certainly if you live in a big city. But let me go a little bit more into detail now. What actually happens when we have an impact, particularly a somewhat larger impact? And what happens to the substrate? Because in these big impact craters that I've looked at, and I'm just a layperson here, there was all sorts of processes. There was big ejecta blankets, of course, and rings of it, and there was partly melting in some of these places. So could you give me a little bit more background on that?
Yeah, so it's a good opportunity to just share some slides. I think it's easy to visualize this.
Oh yeah, sure, please.
So I'll do that now. So this is a graphic from Dieter Stoeffler et al., I believe. And I think it's from the Riese impact crater in Germany. They tried to just visualize this for the public, what was happening. So basically, we have a big chunk of rock, an asteroid, usually going on the order of 20 kilometers per second. So a lot of energy as it impacts the Earth. You see here, the first thing that happens, we see like a jet of impact melt. So this red line, some impact melt is sprayed out of the crater. And this is what we call tektites. So these little globules of melt that fly out of the crater. Perhaps these are just some images I grabbed from the literature, a few centimeters in diameter. We can also get microtektites, really small. And these can go up to thousands of kilometers away from the crater. And then as the impact proceeds, we form this like bowl-shaped depression. And the asteroid is eventually, in large enough impacts over a few kilometers in diameter, the asteroid is completely vaporized and lost. And then we send a lot of material into the air. As we see, this vapor plumes, this molten rock, ejecta thrown out. And then we get rebound, and material from depth is brought up to the surface. So we actually end up with quite a flat feature in the end, not so bowl-shaped in the larger craters. And then material just begins to rain back down to Earth. And as you can see in orange here in the center of the crater, this is what you mentioned about melting. So the biggest impacts over a few kilometers in diameter, we'll get what we call impact melt rock. And if these are large enough impacts, like let's say over 80, 100 kilometers in diameter, up to 200 kilometers in diameter, like we have a few preserved on Earth, then we'll actually get like a melt sheet that starts behaving like an igneous system. And we get like coarse igneous rocks as these cool. So that's kind of an overview, a very simple overview of what happens in an impact.
Thank you very much. That was very, very useful. And it leads me right to the next question, and that is the melt sheets you just mentioned. And you touched on it very early in our conversation about Sudbury. This is an impact crater. It's also one of the big mines in Canada. And it's famous for nickel mining. Nickel is one of these metals that we're quite desperate for these days because we need it for green tech and et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of the reasons why people are actually interested in space mining, because we have a little bit of a shortage of it. And this makes this question particularly important. So here in Sudbury, there was a melt sheet, I understand, following from a meteorite impact. Can you say a few more words about the Sudbury case? Because it's highly intriguing, I find.
Yeah, sure. So Sudbury is one of the biggest impact structures we know of on Earth. Its original diameter was maybe 180, 200 kilometers in diameter.
Whoa.
And today we have preserved, the melt sheet is about 2.5, 3 kilometers thick. So this pool of molten rock that was just sitting at the Earth's surface, and it was covered in breccias as material fell back to Earth. So when we talk about the nickel mining and platinum group elements at Sudbury and copper, it's not actually from the asteroid, it's not from the impactor. We think it's from the igneous system that we have created. So you batch melt a lot of the continental crust, and then you just separate out sulfides, so just separate out or immiscible from the silicate melt, and then you just concentrate them that way. So the actual elements themselves are not extraterrestrial in origin, but it's just the impact process.
Oh, what a pity. I thought the nickel was actually from a meteorite. My misconception, I guess. Very interesting.
Well, as far as I'm aware. Maybe, I don't know what the state of the art on the literature is at the moment, but as far as I'm aware, I think it's just the impact process concentrated it.
Fair enough. I wouldn't know better. So, but somehow I thought that the nickel might actually come from the meteorite, at least in part. But I'm happy to be corrected here. I didn't do any research there. But it's easy to think that an impact crater and nickel, it links up, you know. But that's great. How long would that melt sheet actually have survived in order to create, I guess, a cumulative sequence of sulfides and dense minerals? That's what you would need in order to concentrate that. You would need that melt sheet to be alive for quite a while. Could you give me a feel for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you say, Sudbury, well, there has been debates for decades about whether it's actually a differentiated impact melt sheet, but I think the general agreement now seems to be that it probably is a differentiated, as you say, differentiated fractional crystallization. But we also see evidence for this at other big impact structures. So Manicouagan, also in Canada, Morakwang in South Africa, we see evidence for these differentiation of these melt sheets. And as you say, these coarse-grained igneous rocks that must have taken, they didn't cool instantaneously. So there's been some modeling to try and shed light on these Sudbury, Chicxulub scale, and then recently some work I've done with colleagues, as you mentioned, when I was in the US in Boise State University, we did some high precision geochronology on this to try and shed light on this, and we think the melt sheets would probably have taken a few tens of thousands up to perhaps hundreds of thousands of years to crystallize in the case of Sudbury and Chicxulub. So quite some time that you just seems to act like a regular igneous system. But then they often have hydrothermal systems associated with the impact structures, and they can go on for up to a few million years. So we think Sudbury, Chicxulub, perhaps 2-3 million years, where we still have warm fluids circulating. So
that's quite a time. I mean, one thinks of impact features and processes as a very short-lived thing, at least I was, but I had no idea. I mean, I can see tens of thousands of years for a melt sheet, but the residual heat might be, yes, of course, I can see the logic of it. It might be actually quite some time in there and might therefore redistribute materials there. So I could see that if we ever go to space, talking about the space mining course, if we ever go to space, then this would be interesting to look also into the hydrothermal aureole of these features and see what's going on there. Very interesting. Now, if we have these huge high pressure impact scenarios, I read about impact diamonds, and what's the chance of finding those out there? I mean, I think the bears would not be very happy if we bring a lot of impact diamonds from the moon or so, but what's the chance of actually getting them?
Impact diamonds have been reported from quite a few impact structures, I think. Perhaps the most famous example is Popogai in Russia. So this is like 100-kilometer diameter impact structure formed probably in the late Eocene. Impact diamonds have been extensively documented there. So basically it's if you've got graphite or coal in the target rocks that are struck and you expose them to shock pressure, so above 30 GPa, which you just don't get in the Earth's crust without an impact, then you can transform the graphite or coal to diamonds. I don't think any impact diamonds have ever been commercially exploited at any impact structure. I could be wrong on that, but as far as I'm aware, they haven't been exploited. Again, I'm not sure if De Beers have something to do with that. I think they generally are just, even at Papagaï, we document these impact diamonds, but they're just distributed throughout the impact crater. So again, they're not concentrated necessarily. So it might just be distributed through the whole structure. So it's hard to mine them economically.
Yes, systematically. I mean, I guess one could look into the future and find uses. I mean, but that's maybe a bit far-fetched, but they're there. I think how to kind of collect them and extract them, that's maybe a different thing, but it's interesting to know that diamonds may be a feature. It could be a byproduct of other mining kind of processes. So this could be interesting, actually. Now, you mentioned Tektites earlier, the things thrown out of an impact situation or through during an impact. And of course, they can travel for quite a bit, to my understanding. It would be quite dangerous, potentially. You might not be hit by a meteorite, but if you're kind of ending up in a Tektite kind of field or so, this might be very unpleasant. It could be dangerous for life. Could you say a word about that?
Yeah, I guess it probably wouldn't be fun to get sprayed.
I don't think it would. So.
I think another thing, I hadn't thought about mentioning, but was wildfires. The impacts can sometimes are thought to start fires. Maybe that's related to Tektites. I'm not quite too sure, but so that could be something dangerous if you're in the locality of an impact. But Tektites are kind of interesting. As you said, they can spray hundreds to thousands of kilometers from an impact structure.
I recall as a young geology student, I was very fascinated. I was going to the Mineralogical Museum at my local university, and they had these Tektites from Bohemia in the current day Czech Republic. And at least what they tried to kind of tell me at the time was that they were related to the Reese impact that we talked about. And this would have been several hundred kilometers travel distance, I would think. So is this the way to kind of think about this?
Yeah, exactly. So the Reese impact crater in southern Germany is maybe 25 kilometers in diameter, but we get these Tektites, as you say. I think they're known as moldavites often.
That's right.
There's different types of them. Yeah, a little green glass usually. Well, they look different in different places. But yeah, this spread over Central Europe into Czech Republic, as you say. So it's pretty impressive, I think, for a small impact structure to get this spray.
And now, I mean, I also read that there's Tektites that are found, and there's no associated crater. I guess, as you mentioned earlier, craters can get buried, can get lost, can be obliterated. So what to do with these Tektite fields? I mean, does they help us find some old craters? Yeah,
that's a good point. There's only a handful of Tektite strewn fields on Earth, and most of them, as you say, have been linked to craters. But there's one, this is Southeast Asia, Australasian Tektite field, where we have these Tektites over Southeast Asia, Australia, and even micro-Tektites as far as Antarctica, which we haven't convincingly found an impact structure that caused this. We think we know roughly where it should be, somewhere in Southeast Asia. The surprising thing is, it should be quite young. These Tektites are only 800,000 years old. 800,000 years. So less than 1 million years old. The impact structure, some people think it's probably buried under recent lavas in Southeast Asia. It's also a difficult place of the world, forested, to try and find an impact structure. So that's probably why we just haven't found it yet.
That's interesting. And of course, I guess just thinking a little bit about Tektites, their survival chance is kind of limited because they will get actually buried under lavas as well and things like that. So when you find a Tektite field, then they must be pretty young, I would think. Yeah, that's kind of very sensible, actually. I didn't think of it this way. Great. Now let's maybe move on with our questions. And that is, Well, one of these questions I was struggling with already as a student. Can meteorites bring life in addition to bringing certain materials and melting the substrate and throwing out things? There was this notion when I was a student that maybe life came with a meteorite. And what's your take on that?
First of all, caveat: I don't think I'm an authority on this, but
fair enough.
Yeah, I think that's something that people have thought about for a while. The idea of could something survive on a meteorite between planets if you're transporting something in a meteorite. There was the meteorite from Mars that some people claimed had organic structures visible in it years ago, but then it turned out on further looking and said, probably not. So I'm not exactly sure what the state of the art is on whether something can survive being ejected from a planet, entering an atmosphere. I'm not exactly sure, but it would have to be some pretty robust life.
It would have to be super robust. That's my thinking as well, and that's hard to imagine how this would survive. Even the transit through the Earth's atmosphere is already a tough thing to kind of go through. So you need some. If you think of astronaut travel, you need some pretty sturdy protection to kind of make it through there. So, but then of course, impacts are famous in Earth science for destroying life. You mentioned it, causing mass extinctions like the Chicxulub impact. But of course, the pressure and the energy delivered might also be a way to create life. Could, rather than bringing life on the meteorite, could the impact actually create the conditions for life to start, to commence on a planet like ours? What do you feel about that? Yeah, and sorry if I'm pushing you, because I know you are kind of, you're not necessarily researching the origin of life, but I'd love to have your opinion if that's okay.
Oh, that's why I apply the caveat that I'm not an authority. I apply that to everything I say, so it's fine.
I see.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as we say, in the early solar system, there were a lot more impacts happening. This was a lot more of a fundamental process, and life came about early on Earth, we think. Some people have thought about the idea that, well, impacts, as we say, if you can have a hydrothermal system going for a few million years, you get a restricted basin, you can concentrate the elements required for life. Could this be an environment for the origin of life? And I think that's a viable, that's still not been thrown out. You know, that's still something people are thinking about. So yeah, I think that's very much, why not?
This is, of course, the big issue that will come up when we think about mining space, because there could then, in theory, be life, however developed or primitive, on other heavenly bodies. And what's your kind of feeling about life elsewhere in the solar system? That's where we would start. Obviously, we would struggle to go beyond that. But I mean, in theory, there could be simple forms of life somewhere out there in the solar system. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, if we're going to encounter life at some point, it's likely to be super simple, single-celled. You know, you'd probably get that past an ethics committee easily enough. But yeah, so I think the chances of finding, you know, higher life or intelligent life is not such a big issue. So yeah, it will be something to think about, of course, as if we are moving out into space. That,
yes, it would be
our footprint.
I agree with you. On the other side, again, I think life would have to be super sturdy to survive on some asteroid, the kind of main target we would probably go for, or the moon. I think we're pretty confident that life on moon is not really there or highly developed if it's there. So I think, yeah, it's not a key issue I'm personally concerned about, but it makes for an interesting conversation topic. And of course, when we go further out, then that's a different case. But I mean, we are after the metals, the nickel and the cobalt right now, and that I cannot quite see a lot of life surviving on an asteroid in the asteroid belt, so without atmosphere or anything. So Now, having done that, I think we are reaching the end of my questions. So this is very exciting to think about meteorite impact craters and meteorites and life that is associated with that. Gavin, is there anything else you kind of like to add coming from the discussion that we have had, or do you feel you covered it all?
Yeah, I think we touched on a lot of different aspects there. I think that was pretty good. Yeah, one final thought I had was, I mentioned 200 impacts on Earth, but we actually don't know when most of those happened. Only perhaps 50, less than 50, I think we really know, oh, this is well constrained in terms of age. So even on Earth, before we go further afield, there's a lot more to understand the impacts right here. But I think, I've enjoyed the conversation, touched on lots of different aspects.
That's very interesting about the number of impacts. I mean, the other day I saw a model of the moon, and it's of course littered with impact craters. And you wonder, I mean, Earth must have looked like that as well at some point. It's just that we don't see it anymore. And this is an amazing thought. So our dynamic planet obviously kind of changes the environment quite consistently and over time. And this is something that you only appreciate when you look at these other bodies that don't have plate tectonics, etc. So, well, yeah. Gavin, this was great. I enjoyed that immensely. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, all the very best for your career, and talk soon, I hope.
Great. Thanks, well.
Bye.